to the Graduate School of Social Work. This is the first in the lecture series for the 2010-2011 GSSW lecture series. This is a very special lecture series this year because it's also really focused on the 80th anniversary of the school. And we have been very fortunate to secure really outstanding group of scholars that will be here over the year. But the one today is sort of, if you're in the area of youth development and youth violence and sort of stuff, it truly is, he's one of the top scholars in the field. I had the wonderful opportunity to have dinner last night with Dr. Garbarino, and it was not only, as you know, in academia, many times we write things that goes into the library that really only our peers read. But this is a gentleman who writes things that people in the community read and actually implement the work that he's doing in their practice on an everyday basis. Dr. Garbarino is the Maude C. Clarke Professor of Psychology and the Director of the Center of Human Rights for Children at Loyola University in Chicago. I looked through his CV. The man is very, very prolific. He's written 20 books. I think many of us know him from his book, The Lost Boys, plus a number of other books, and 120 plus articles and book chapters. And I think from dinner last night, he hasn't stopped. He's continuing to move forward. We're really pleased to have someone of his, and for me, it's really a pleasure because when you teach and use people's things in your classes, also you get to meet them in person. It's like an academic rock star. That's good finally getting a chance to meet him. So we're really happy to have him here today and to kick off our lecture series for this year, Dr. James Garbarino.
As you can see, the microphone was set up for me, not for the dean. We were taking pictures outside for the magazine, and luckily there was a 2-foot-tall ledge that I could stand on so that I could put my arm down and look down at him and put it on. He was very gracious of that. Well, the title we gave to this presentation today that I'm delighted to be here with you to present is Pathways from Childhood Trauma to Youth Violence. And this is a topic that has increasingly become the focus of my thinking. It's something I think about in general quite often, but specifically a number of times a year, because one of the things I do with my time is to work as an expert witness in death penalty cases around the country. And typically what that involves is trying to understand how an individual, mostly men, but not only men, got from being an infant to being a very dangerous, violent, aggressive adult who may have committed 1, 5, 7, 11 murders, depending on who it is. And to try to help the jury and the judge understand how this happens. And so this involves, in addition to reading piles of documents, school records, social history developing by a social worker, psychologist reports, neurologist reports, and then interviewing the individual to try to put the pieces together and get a feel for them as an individual and try in some way to make sense of all of this. Not to excuse what they've done, but to comprehend it. And in this particular instance, in death penalty cases, to get them to the jury to perhaps understand that to execute this person is almost a double penalty. They've already experienced the penalty of a childhood and adolescence full of trauma and abuse and deprivation and injustice, and it would be a sort of compounding of the injustice to execute them for the results of all of that. These are men who, for the most part, are never going to leave prison anyway, so it's really a question about a sort of understanding of what it means to take care of people even when they've done terrible things. So you'll hear reference to that in general, and at the end some very specific reference to that. Now I know that we're a room full of do-gooders. Although I'm a psychologist, I've taught in social work programs in a number of universities around the country over the years. years, and so I know a little bit about the Do Good impulse. So I want to begin with a sort of slogan that I always keep close when I, as an aspiring do-gooder, and with other do-gooders, and that slogan is, you can change the world, ... But unless you know what you're doing, please don't. Of course, the message behind the slogan is that good intentions are not enough, that good intentions must be coupled with understanding. Otherwise, we can produce effects that are exactly the opposite of what we intended. For example, you're probably all familiar with the program Scared Straight. It was a time 25 years ago, and it was a very, very popular program, millions of dollars were spent. And the idea, who could quarrel with the idea? You want to reduce the odds that teenagers become delinquent and violent. And the idea was, well, then you bring them to a prison, and you'll have career criminals lecture them on how terrible this would be. If you went to prison, you'll be raped, you'll be beaten, you'll ruin your life. And the idea was to scare them so much they would go straight. Sounds pretty good. In fact, pretty soon they said, we can make it even more efficient by saving the bus money. We'll make a video. You show the kids the video of these scary guys yelling at teenagers, and away will delinquency go down the drain. The only problem was, when they did the research, they found that it worked really well in scaring kids who were Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. They often peed in their pants. But kids who were actually on the path to violent delinquency, it actually made them worse. Because the message they took from the program was, man, I'm really going to have to be tough when I go to jail. Very good intentions, but it didn't really understand in any sophisticated or deep way the process that leads from a kid to a delinquent or a violent delinquent. And we're full of programs like that in many ways around the country. You know, there's the DARE program. You know, sounds like a great idea. Police officers go into school and talk to kids about drugs. Perfectly good intentions, but when the evaluation was done of the original version, now there is a revised version, which to my knowledge has not really been evaluated, but the original version, the finding was, it had basically no effect on urban and rural kids, and for suburban kids, it increased drug use. So when you see a suburban SUV driving around with a DARE sticker on the back, you know they're probably getting high. At the time, Scared Straight was very popular. I wrote a memo to Washington asking for funding to use the same approach, that is a video, to resolve all of our problems. I had a video I was going to use to solve the problem of poverty. It's called Scared Rich. Poor people would talk on camera about how terrible it is to be poor. Kids would see this and say, oh my gosh, I guess I better become an investment banker. So, you know, so we're here because depth is what we're after. You know, the German psychologist, if you know him at all, you know him probably by the English name, Kurt Lewin. He was German, Kurt Lewin. Levine or Lewin wrote, there is nothing so practical as a good theory, which to an American ear often sounds like a contradiction in terms. We tend to think there's theory and theoretical over there, and then there's practical stuff over here. But what Levine was telling us was that to do good practice, you have to understand things deeply. And that's really what he meant by a good theory. For example, you know, in almost every state, there is an attempt to prevent child abuse centered around what is called home health visiting. And although some of that work started in Denver, it really came to fruition in the work of a guy named David Oles. He developed this program of home visitors that begins prenatally and goes on for the first 2 years of life. And evaluation found that of all the child abuse prevention programs, it was probably the most effective. It reduced the rate of child abuse in high-risk families from 19% to 4%, which is pretty dramatic. It involved nurses who began visiting prenatally and for the first 2 years of life. Well, when the program started to be disseminated, people said, well, gosh, we can make that more practical. Much more practical to wait till the babies are born. You didn't have to find all these pregnant girls and women. Well, they made that change, and David, who's an old friend of mine, was pulling his hair out. He actually has hair, and pulling it out. And I said, I didn't just flip a coin. I didn't just say sort of, all right, heads it's prenatally, tails it's postnatally. No, there was an important theoretical reason why it began prenatally. There was a kind of window of opportunity which would close up after the baby was born. And other people say, well, we can have paraprofessionals do this. They're cheaper than nurses. Well, when the research was done on those variations, they found it didn't prevent child abuse. So rather than being a practical improvement, it was a sort of waste of time in a way. So the commitment to dig deeply is profoundly important to those of us who are good deed doers. When my book, Lost Boys, that the Dean referred to, towards the end of the book, I can't remember, it's the very end, has this phrase that says, understanding without action is irresponsible. And that's really what I'm getting at, this, two sides of that coin. That action without understanding is irresponsible, just like understanding without action is irresponsible. So we're here today to try to improve our understanding so that the actions that we do are more deeply grounded. Now, for me to be more deeply grounded, the starting point is always what we call, at least where I come from intellectually, an ecological perspective on development. And that essentially means the firm recognition that because development always occurs in context, it's very rare that there are sort of universal cause-effect relationships that work the same way for everyone and everywhere and every time and every place. Mostly what it is context specific. Now the context can range from the context of the individual as a biological organism, to the family, to the school, to the neighborhood, to the community, to the nation state, to the society, to historical periods. And it all sort of comes to bear on this sort of, again, sort of slogan, if you will. When the question is, does X cause Y? The best scientific answer is almost always, it depends. Frustrating as that is, annoying as that is, it's mostly the truth. I'll start with a sort of cute, provocative example. A developmental psychologist named Eleanor Maccabee, one of the giants in our field, many years ago did a study that asked this question. The question may seem sort of cute or bizarre, I don't know. The question was, does the amount of babbling that an infant does predict how smart that child will become? You know, babies babble. If you measure how much they were babbling, would it predict their IQ at age 5? And the answer was, it depends. Sort of a trick question. That's always the answer. It depends. In this case, it depended on gender. But for girl babies, there was a strong positive relationship between the amount of infant babbling and IQ at age 5. But for boys, there was zero correlation. They might babble a lot, babble a little for boys. It didn't predict for girls it did. They got to the same point, essentially, of intellectual competence, but as if they had different pathways to get there. For girls, seemed to be more through verbal behavior. For boys, it was some other pathway. Now you add to this the fact that in the womb, in utero, the jawbone of the female fetus develops and moves before the jawbone of the male fetus. And you start to think maybe there's something going on with verbal behavior as a context for development. Now this is a finding that is very practical if you're either a man or a woman married to a man or a woman. Because if you're a woman married to a man, you can bring this finding home and say to your spouse, well, the research shows the hours I spend on the phone talking to my friends are making me smarter. And for a man who's married to a woman, you can explain that, the professor says that the hours I spend silently in front of the TV watching sports are boosting my IQ. Now, if you're gay or lesbian, you have to work this out yourself. That's so often the case if you're gay or lesbian. You have to work it out in American society. But this isn't a finding that's limited to something cute and esoteric like this. This is the way things are. For example, are children born with minor neurological damage more likely to end up as violent teenagers? It depends, yes. This is the audience response. Like a church here. Study found that if babies are born with minor neurological damage and live in well-functioning families, they were no more likely to become violent delinquents than neurologically normal babies. But if the same babies are born into dysfunctional families, they're 4 times as likely to develop into adolescent delinquents. Is it true that women attempt suicide more than men, but men actually kill themselves more? It does depend. That's what one that usually gets me because if you work in the United States, you're convinced it's a fact. Women attempt suicide more than men actually kill themselves. In China, however, women actually kill themselves more likely than men. And it has something to do with technologies. That in China, very common suicidal behavior among rural Chinese women is the ingestion of insecticide or herbicide, which is not particularly lethal if you live in a place where somebody can get on a cell phone and call 911 and the medics will come and stabilize you and get you to a tertiary poison control center. But in rural China, probably isn't a cell phone, there's no 911 to call, there's no EMTs to come, there's no hospital to take you to, and so it becomes a very lethal behavior. So many of the facts are really context-specific facts. Here's a sort of interesting one. I'm not sure how to phrase it as a question to which the answer is it depends, but the FBI issued a study recently that found that if medical trauma technology today were at the same level of sophistication it was in the 1930s, the homicide rate today would be 7 times higher than it is. So think about that. You know, we think of homicide or murder as being a very concrete thing. You're either dead or not dead. But actually, whether you're dead or not dead depends on where and when you're shot. The same injury today is 1/7 as likely to result in your death as it was in 1930. If you're at all involved in the military, you know this is a big story in the military, that the ratio of deaths to injuries has shifted dramatically within the 20th century into the 21st century. The same battlefield injury today is not likely to get you killed. But of course, everything has other consequences, and that's one reason why there are so enormous numbers of soldiers with incredibly catastrophic brain injuries and amputations, because these would have been dead. These would have been killed in action in World War II, even in Vietnam. Here's one. Are boys more aggressive than girls? Do you dare say it depends to that one? Let me give a study that shows that the answer is, it depends. It's very interesting, and for students I want to tell you, this is a study, one of the best studies ever done about context influence of aggression. It was done by 2 undergraduates as their senior honors thesis. What they did was have boys and girls play a video game, a violent video game. Well, a video game, so it's probably a violent video game, in which you drop bombs on the enemy. So it's a very American video game. But they had them play the game in 2 different contexts. One was highly personalized. They sit close together, they have name tags, they chat, they talk about themselves and their history to build up a sort of personal connection. In the other setting, they play the game in a very depersonalized setting. Separate, far apart, no name tags, no conversation, and they had a little questionnaire to measure how depersonalized they felt and manipulation worked. Well, when the kids play the game in the personalized context, boys dropped 31 bombs and girls dropped on average 27. Well, everybody knows boys are more aggressive than girls. But when they played the game in the depersonalized context, boys dropped 37 bombs and girls dropped 41. Notice that both boys and girls dropped more in the depersonalized context, but the sex difference disappears and is in the direction of reversing. Larry Aber, one of our colleagues, very interesting study about aggressive fantasies, and found that by age 12, girls had, if anything, higher levels of aggressive fantasies than boys. So you may look all sweet and peaceful. We know what's going on. And see, in this study, when you create a personalized setting, it tends to evoke social norms. And so any social norms about girls don't hit, girls are not violent, boys do, come out more in the personalized setting. And the overall level of aggression is lower, because in general there's a sort of a value, don't drop bombs on people. But in the depersonalized setting, all bets are off, and the cultural inhibitions sort of fade away, and so both boys and girls drop more, and all this aggression in the girls is given an opportunity to be expressed. This is another practical finding. If you're ever faced with an angry mob, one way to save your life is to personalize it, to personalize them, to make yourself a real person to them. If you ever read or saw the movie For To Kill a Mockingbird, you may remember a scene in which this lawyer is trying to save his client from being lynched, and there's a lynch mob in front of the jail, and he comes down and it's just close to the boiling point, and then his children show up. His daughter Scout, for example, says to one of them, "Oh, Mr. Jones, I know you from the grocery store. You know, I was in there buying Twinkies. I was in there buying cupcakes last week." And the son said, "Oh, Mr. Smith, you know, your son and I played baseball together, and I was at your house having cookies." And as they personalize it, the violence subsides. So, context, context, context. Now, context is particularly important in thinking about the pathways to aggression, because aggression is natural to children. Now, this is a question that's been debated for centuries. It used to be called the nature of man, when we could get away with talking about the nature of men, and to mean everybody. Now it's the nature of humans. I had a student many years ago who refused to use any gendered pronouns. She insisted on saying "co" instead of him or her. I say, "How co's day?" Is that co's dog? Obviously, it never caught on since you're not responding to it. It's a bit like Esperanto. How do you know what Esperanto is? Esperanto? Almost nobody without gray hair knows what Esperanto is. Anyway, this question, though, are children naturally aggressive, or do they have to be taught to be aggressive? I think, in a sense, was answered by a Canadian psychologist named Tremblay. He basically found almost all children, by age 22 months, when 90% of boys and over 80% of girls are engaging in specific, observable, reportable aggressive acts. Pinching, hitting, biting, punching, kicking. And Tremblay says, you know, the reason people don't know this is sort of twofold. One, they have amnesia. In one of his studies, you know, he talks with mothers when their kids are 15 months old. Did their child ever do this? Yes, 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 yes. He comes back when they're 5 and says, "Did your child do this when they were a baby?" No. Of course, parental amnesia is how the human race continues. So if anybody really remembered having a child, nobody would have two. And no caring mother would allow her daughter to have any. So this is part of a general phenomenon of evolutionary survival. The other thing that Tremblay points out is we don't, well, you know, there are public opinion surveys that ask people at what stage in life are human beings most aggressive. And people almost always say adolescence. But actually it's infancy and early childhood. Tremblay says the other reason people don't realize that is that babies are so weak. The way he makes the point, he says, you know, if all the 15-month-olds went to bed tonight, when they woke up tomorrow, they were all 6'5" and weighed 230 pounds, what would happen to America's parents tomorrow? They would be dead or maimed. Because now these huge beings would pull their ears off and give them concussions and break their ribs when they poke them. And I tell you, if you've ever been to a prison, you can meet some 6'5", 210-pound toddlers, intellectually and emotionally. So the point of Tremblay's work is that aggression is where we start. And so the really interesting story is not how do kids become aggression, but why do most kids give it up? Because even, you know, adult males, only about 10% seem to have any sort of chronic problems with aggression. I mean, there are adult males in this group. Punch anybody yet today? Kick anybody? You know, no. We do a pretty good job of this. But our attention, of course, focuses on the 10% who don't do a good job. So the implication of Tremblay's work is that in the emergence of aggressive behavior, what we're really concerned about, what are the forces that amplify this pre-existing disposition or suppress it or channel it? And two psychologists have done a very good job of explaining this, are Patrick Tolman and Nancy Guerra. They did a very nice review a number of years ago, in which they said, the two processes that really shape this are cognitive structuring and behavioral rehearsal. By cognitive structuring, they meant the ideas that you get about aggression. Is it okay? Is it not okay? Who does it? When do you do it? How do you do it? To whom do you do it? Who can do it? Who can't do it? The ideas about aggression, coupled with behavioral rehearsal, which means being in actual situations where behavior can be modeled and reinforced. Aggressive behavior can be modeled and reinforced. And just knowing about those two processes that work like if you drive a standard transmission car, like the gas pedal and the clutch, that it's the relation between the two of them that makes the engine go. you can see how if ideas change about aggression, we can expect changes in aggressive behavior. For example, there's this book I did called See Jane Hit, about aggression in girls. And one of the things it deals with is in the question, has the cognitive structuring of aggression for girls changed over the last 40 years? And I think it's pretty clear it has. It used to be boys got the message, boys hit. Just a matter of who to hit, when to hit, why to hit, how to hit. But for girls, the message was girls don't hit, particularly good girls don't hit. And yet, in the last 20 or 30 years, there's been a tremendous change in that message to girls. Consider something as popular as Harry Potter. How many of you have seen or read any Harry Potter? Well, you know, if you don't know, there's Harry Potter, the sort of geeky wizard guy. But the really attractive character is Hermione, the girl. This girl is smart, she's tough, she's pro-social, she's even got thin ankles. This is a girl that anybody would like to have for their daughter, sister, granddaughter, whatever. And yet, in the third Harry Potter book, you know, they've been troubled by this bully, his name is Malfoy. And they eventually stopped his reign of terror. And how does it happen? Hermione punches him in the nose. And when she does it, she says, boy, that felt good. Boy, that felt good. And how do her friends respond? They cheer her on. And if you see the movie in a theater, how does everybody in the theater respond? They cheer her on. How could you credibly say to any girl who's seen that movie, girls don't hit, when Hermione, the best girl ever, just punched somebody in the nose? And this is repeated over and over and over again in all levels and dimensions and cartoons and movies and on it goes. So it should be no surprise that the ideas about girls and aggression have shifted. And behavior rehearsal has probably shifted as well. For example, this is what I want to make sure you listen very carefully to this, because don't take the wrong message from what I'm saying. One of the most prevalent contexts in which children witness and exhibit aggressive behavior is sports. Most sports involve at some level crashing into people, knocking people down, hitting people with things. And that provides an opportunity for that behavior to be modeled by other children, reinforced if you do it, or punished, or whatever. Think about this. A generation ago, for every one girl who participated in high school sports, there were 35 boys. The ratio was 35 to 1. Recent data have the ratio of every one girl, it's got 1.5 boys. Almost equalized in sort of a generation. This means, and now here's the point you have to hear. This is really good that girls are involved in sports. Ms. Magazine had a survey of women executives, and 80% of them said that their experience as athletes has prepared them better for the sort of rough and tumble world of being an executive. There's all these studies about less early pregnancy, less drug use, less all kinds of stuff, anorexia if you're an athlete as a girl. It's a great thing, but one of the side effects is you have to deal with the fact that it provides behavioral rehearsal for aggression. So it's not surprising to me that given that and the cognitive structuring issues, that a generation ago the FBI says for every one girl arrested for assault, there were 10 boys arrested for assault. Now for every one girl, it's 4 boys. And if you know the statistical technique meta-analysis, which is a way of clumping together huge numbers of studies and coming out with a sort of averaging effect of the size of an effect for some variable across all these studies with their different methodologies, older meta-analyses of gender find twice the effect of gender on aggression than newer meta-analyses of gender on aggression. So I don't think it's ever going to equalize, and it has equalized mostly in the sort of routine aggression. It hasn't equalized much at the end of lethal aggression. So that's the important thing to know about these two things. Now, the result of aggression is a sort of social map in your head about aggression, when it's legitimate to do, and how you view the world in terms of whether it's likely to require aggression. Now, I don't have a visual, but if you could imagine a visual with an up and down north-south axis that is labeled perception of threat, and it goes from paranoid at one end, where you see threat when no rational person would, to Pollyanna at the other end, where you don't see threat when any normal person would. And then imagine across the east-west dimension is legitimization of aggression. And at one end is the pacifist who said there is no situation under which aggression is legitimate. At the other end is a psychopath who says aggression is fine whenever I need it, I want it. I want your jacket? Of course I can kill you for that. And so if you have that 2x2 sort of dimension going on, you can imagine that as kids experience aggression, as they get messages about it, their location on that social map may shift. Many of the kids that I've interviewed are in the sort of northwest corner of this map. In the sense they have very high perception of threat, they're very attuned to threat, and engage in a lot of what you might call preemptive violence. And they're also, they feel that aggression is a perfectly legitimate response to any situation in which you need it. But there are people who are in, the southeast corner who don't see threat and don't believe in aggression even if they saw it, and it's a way of mapping where people stand. So that's something you should keep in mind, because if you're ever going to work with violent kids or delinquents or criminals, understanding where their social map is will be very useful to you. Certainly has been to me. But I want to spend the rest of them talking about a sort of core special issue in this, and that is the role of trauma in childhood in influencing this pathway about where one ends up with respect to violence and aggression. Trauma has many definitions. There will be sort of evocative, poetic definition, like events from which you never fully recover and change you forever. One sex abuse researcher says trauma is to come face to face with human vulnerability in the natural world, or with the capacity for evil in human nature. But if you want a sort of technical definition, I think one person who's really contributed to that is Lenore Terr, T-E-R-R, who's a child psychiatrist. You can sort of draw from her work this definition that trauma is the simultaneous experience of overwhelming arousal coupled with overwhelming negative cognitions. Overwhelming arousal means that the sensory experience of trauma is too much to manage. It blows your circuits. If you're really old like me, it blows the fuse box. Nobody has fuse box anymore. The point is that you can't manage this arousal. People faint, people feel like they're out of body, people feel lightheaded, people feel they want to throw up, people feel all kinds of stuff, but these are not the feelings that people manage well. But just having those feelings doesn't constitute trauma. You can have those feelings by going on a ride at the circus or the Midway. You can have those feelings having sex, all kinds of experiences. But for it to be traumatic, it has to have the other element, which is overwhelming negative cognitions, which is understanding that what is happening is outside what you thought were the normal bounds of human experience. That somebody could take your parents and put them in a pot with water and force you to light the flame under it and boil them to death, as a kid told me about in Mozambique in Southeast Africa. Or in Cambodia, I was in Cambodia 20-something years ago, I was back last month. You may remember this film called The Killing Fields during the 1970s. This maniacal regime took over in Cambodia in a period of 7 years, essentially caused the death of 30% of the population. Many of them just slaughtered. Well, imagine you go to one of the killing fields outside Phnom Penh. It's not a big area, it's about an acre, and 20,000 people were killed here, and their bodies dumped. Now, the sensory part of it, you're not hearing it, you're not smelling it, it's been long enough. When I was there 22 years ago, there was more of a sensory element in the sense that it was raining that day. The rain was still exposing bones in these graves, even though they've been excavated. But there was information-rich sign that says, in this hole, 2,032 people were found. And you go around and there's a tree over it, it's like an oak tree, and you're told it was used to kill babies. But you take them by the feet and hit their head against them. If you gasp at that, that's an overwhelming negative cognition. You know that now. And then in the center of this place they had built a monument, it was a tower of skulls. Even there, rich in information, the skulls are arranged by age and gender. Birth to 2-year-old boy skulls, birth to 2-year-old girl skulls. Now, I know it's awful to think about that, But the reason I don't worry too much about traumatizing you, telling you that, is you're getting the overwhelming cognition, you're not getting the sensory experience. Now, if you had a previous traumatic experience, this may be more difficult for you because you may have a sort of wellspring of the emotional arousal stuff to link up with that overwhelming cognition, but I apologize for that. What I want to say about trauma in this process is that trauma creates a need. To experience trauma creates a need. It creates a need for processing and reassurance. Now, some of you will know the work of Bruce Perry, a colleague and friend of mine, an amazing mind dealing with trauma issues. I don't usually read stuff. I'm going to actually read you a few lines from a piece Bruce wrote about this. He says, our ancestors had to learn to cope with trauma in order to survive. Somehow traumatized people have to find ways to continue to sustain family, community, and culture and move forward. What did they do to cope with trauma? And so he says, if you look at Aboriginal people and traditional cultures, you get a sense of they all sort of came up with basically the same solution. He says the core elements include an overarching belief system, a rationale, a belief, a reason for the pain, injury, loss, a retelling of or reenactment of the trauma in words, dance, or song, a set of somatosensory experiences, or body experiences, such as touch, the pattern, repetitive movements of dance and song, all provided in an intensive relational experience with family and clan participating in the ritual. And he says, as a guy who's a real expert in neurobiology, says that what's striking to him is that all of these elements together are just what you would create if you were trying to deal with the brain issues that come from being traumatized. So he says, the message is, retell the story, hold each other, massage, dance, and sing, create images of the battle, the hunt, and death, fill literature, sculpture, and drama with retellings, reconnect to loved ones and to community, celebrate, eat, and share. And then he goes on to say, modern psychiatry and psychology have sort of tinkered with these, and in communities where communities are so destabilized or upset, they may not be able to call upon these traditional strategies and may need outside help. And individuals may be so profoundly traumatized, they need help. But the point is that trauma creates a need for this stuff. When we did a project years ago on Palestinian kids who were involved in high levels of political violence, the kids who did better were the ones who had parents who were psychologically available to them and had a way to give meaning to their experience. I was in Cambodia recently for World Vision, and I was visiting, among other things, a program they have for girls who were sex trafficked into prostitution and have been recovered. And if you know anything about this field, one of the problems, even if you rescue these girls, if you don't do it right, they go back. For reasons that have to do with a decimated view of the future and incredible self-esteem issues and all the rest of it. We visited a group of girls from age 9 to 17, all of whom had been sold into sexual slavery, and somebody had rescued them. But they were successful in getting them back on developmental track because they in effect did all those things that Bruce Perry's talking about in a very sophisticated way. It's a residential thing, the girls are safe. They do have great rituals around food. They educate them. They teach them marketable skills. They make the girls into an asset when they go back into their home community, in part by giving them a sewing machine to take back to the village with them. So they don't come back empty-handed, they come back as a possessor of resources. But they also engage in trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy to deal with their cognitive restructuring about their experience. The single most important common thing the girls all said before they began the program was, our society hates us because we are just the lowest of the low. Any of you see the movie Born into Brothels? If you haven't, I highly recommend a documentary about when we started a photography project of kids whose mothers were all prostitutes. But if you saw the movie, you have to remember some of that, this feeling of being totally outcast. And in fact, she could only find one school in Calcutta that would take any of these kids because they were considered so damaged simply they being the children of the sex industry. Anyway, the point is that trauma creates this need. And if you meet this need for reassurance and processing and compassionate love and social re-identification, the prognosis is actually very good. In fact, if you only have one incident of trauma, one bad day, if you're a child living in Manhattan during 9/11, the prognosis is terrific. On average, something like 85% of kids who have one of these bad days will be back to normal within 6, 8, 9, 12 months. Because the community, the family, the school provide what Bruce Perry described. However, and this is the big however, if this need is not met, it becomes a powerful vulnerability. And that's the thing. It isn't that trauma directly leads, do not pass go directly to jail. It's that if you don't meet the need for reassurance processing and compassionate love and social reidentification, then you pick up the go to jail card. Because then you have this vulnerability to the accumulation of both external and internal risk factors. For example, the work of Kenneth Dodge. Dodge asked the question, why do some abused kids develop a chronic pattern of aggression, bad behavior, acting out, and violating the rights of others, and others don't? Now, if you have any clinical background, you know that to say a child has a chronic pattern of aggression, bad behavior, acting out, and violating the rights of others means they're eligible to be diagnosed with conduct disorder. Let me say two things about the diagnostic process generally. One, it's risky emotionally and from a social justice point of view because it very easily puts you on that pathway where you stop thinking about children and start thinking about cases and diagnoses. And I know I don't like to be treated that way. When I go in to sit with one of these guys, I hope that eventually he will see me as more than the bald white psychologist. But in return, he has a right to expect that I will think of him as a person with a name and history and talents and ability. The other danger is more intellectual, that it's very easy for these diagnostic labels to become a substitute for thought. For example, if you read my book on those boys, there's a section which I talk about the New York State Youth Prison System. Their research office had a research report one year that said 85% of the boys in prison have conduct disorder. Well, duh. How else would you get yourself in prison except by showing a chronic pattern of aggression, bad behavior, acting out, and violating the rights of others? When you put it that way, it doesn't sound like a finding. It's like saying, imagine if you, for your master's project, did a research study for the school board in your school district on the football team at their high school. And you reported to the board that, based on my research, I'm able to say with some confidence that 85% of the players on our football team are athletes. And the really interesting question is, what are the other 15% doing? What are they doing? So, but, if a kid develops a chronic pattern of aggression, bad behavior, acting out, and violating the rights of others by the time they're 10, this is a really serious thing to know, because they are now on a fast track. So Dodge was asking, we know that abused children are more likely to develop this pattern. Can we learn anything about why and who? And he found that actually he got pretty good at saying which abused children would develop this conduct disorder problem based on their social cognition. And there were 4 things about it. 1, they were hypersensitive to negative social cues. In the environment, it's also always giving you social information. This one is smiling, my old friend Penny Trickett here is smiling, and somebody else is frowning. This one has a happy tone of voice, a slow tone of voice. Research shows that children can be very sensitive to that. But the combination that Dodge identified were kids who were hypersensitive to negative social cues and oblivious to positive social cues. Most of us get both, and it keeps us sort of anchored in the middle. Yeah, this one is frowning, but this one is smiling. Some people are nasty, some people are nice. Imagine if all you got was, all right, there's another example of negative, and that was negative. I don't see his smile, she's frowning. I don't hear that positive tone of voice, this one sounds angry. So their social map is being skewed more and more into this antagonistic, negativistic way. The third thing that Dodge found was that these kids have a very narrow repertoire of responses when aroused. They basically have one response, hit. Afraid, hit. Angry, hit. Confused, hit. Sad, hit. Hit. It's almost as if they have a road, imagine a map of the United States, and here's Colorado here, And if I say to you, what direction is Canada? Well, if you visualize that, most of us would say north. And sometimes, north is north. But this is to get you there. You're in Denver. What direction would you go to get to Mexico? He says north. How about New York City? And he says north. How about Los Angeles? And he says north. North, 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 north. Because the guy interviewed one says, now Bob, what do you do if this happens? Well, I'd have to punch him. Well, Bob, what about this happen? Well, I have to stab him. Well, how about this happen? Well, I have to shoot him. North, 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 north. The fourth thing that Dodge found were these were kids who had drawn the conclusion that aggression was successful in human interaction. Now, of course, children are like little anthropologists. What do they know? They go out and they figure the world out based on what they see. And you can see why an abused child is at risk here, because what do they see? Mom and dad are arguing, dad punches mom in the face. Oh, punch in the face works pretty good. Little baby brother is whining for ice cream. Mom hits him upside of the head. He stops whining. Hit him upside the head works pretty good. I take Joey's lunch. He gets up to complain to the teacher. I punch him in the stomach. He doesn't complain. Punch in the stomach works pretty good. So the conclusion that aggression is a successful strategy. So what Dodge found was if by age 6 you had all 4 of these ways of thinking and you were abused, you were 8 times more likely to develop conduct disorder than if you were abused and you didn't have these 4 ways of thinking. In fact, if you were abused and didn't have these 4 ways of thinking, you found you were at no greater risk for conduct disorder than non-abusers. So the social maps that you're growing up, and you can think, how do you get those social maps? How, what are the experiences that shape you that way? And you can build intervention programs to reverse that. But you also would need to recognize that why do some children have more trouble thinking clearly in a constructive way when aroused than other kids? Maybe it's something about them that they carry around. And as an example, there's a fascinating study done by Avshalom Caspi and Terry Moffat on the effect of a particular gene, called the MAOA gene, monoamine oxidase, which is a brain chemical, neurotransmitter that affects how you process arousal. Now, to sort of simplify, the gene can either be turned off or turned on. If it's turned on, you have as normal level. If it's turned off, you don't have as much as people usually have, so you have problems in processing arousal. So here's what they did. They looked at the effect of having the gene turned on or turned off in the context of whether or not you were abused or not. Because remember, it all depends. And if the outcome measure was conduct disorder, this is what they found. For kids who were abused and had the MAO gene turned off, 85% developed conduct disorder. But if they're abused and the MAO gene is turned on, it was 42%. So here's something you're carrying around. The kid doesn't choose this. One of the things we always tell the jury, you don't choose to have this gene turned on or off. And yet, it doubles the odds that if you're abused, you're going to go down that pathway. But I think the really important finding is that for non-abused children, the gene becomes irrelevant. That the rate of conduct disorder is low and is the same whether the gene is turned on or turned off if you're not abused. So the point is that preventing child abuse, preventing the trauma of child abuse, neutralizes the gene. But if you have the trauma of child abuse, you now have a need. If the need is not met, it becomes a vulnerability. The vulnerability translates into a problem of aggression, bad behavior, acting out, and violent arounds of others. This vulnerability also makes you more susceptible to social toxins, to a socially toxic environment. For example, 30% on average, 30% of kids who develop conduct disorder by the time they're 10, 30% end up as serious violent delinquents. But it depends on what neighborhood you're in. In some neighborhoods, it's not 30%, but 60% of the 10-year-olds with conduct disorder end up as serious violent delinquents. In other neighborhoods, it's not 30%, but 15%. So the neighborhood in which you're living and having conduct disorder affects by a factor of 4. You're 4 times more likely to go that path of serious violent delinquency in neighborhood A than in neighborhood B. And other people's research says the kind of neighborhoods that typically put you up to 60% are neighborhoods that are very strongly connected socially, but have very antisocial attitudes, behaviors, all the rest of it going on. The kind of neighborhoods we often hear good parents say, I would not let my children play with other children in this neighborhood. And it's often interpreted as social isolation, which it is, but it's an attempt to isolate from toxic influences. I was just, well, I'll tell you about that later. Rejection. That rejection is one of the most powerful negative influences on development. It's actually one of the few things that seems to have almost a universal effect. The anthropologist Ronald Roman has been studying this for decades, and after thousands of studies, finds that rejection, which he calls a psychological malignancy, a psychological cancer, by itself can account for about 25% of the variation in bad behavioral developmental outcomes. Why? Because kids have a fundamental need for acceptance. And when you reject them, it is, particularly if a parent rejects them, it is traumatic. And for a young child, it's overwhelmingly traumatic. You would not be surprised, I'm sure, that how frequent father absence is in the guys I interview on death row, because everybody knows kids without fathers have problems with aggression and all that. What would probably really surprise you, maybe even stun you, is how frequently maternal abandonment figures in their lives. There is probably nothing worse that can happen to you than to be abandoned by your mother. I have sat with really tough, violent, streetwise kids. You know, one kid committed 52 robberies, and we started to talk about his mother abandoning him. His thumb went right into his mouth, and he started rocking in his chair. Dramatic experience. I was interviewing a guy recently whose mother abandoned him at 2, came back into his life at 9, and then died when he was 10. And this guy would not talk to anybody, a very scary guy. When I walked in to sit with him, the first thing I said was, I understand your mother died. I know it's the worst thing that can happen. And I talked. Because that was the giant gorilla in the room that most other people were not willing to go to. So rejection, and you've got a kid who one of these guys, where his mother, when he was 2.5, his mother said, I'm taking your brother and my drugs and you're on your own. The profundity of that is hard to overestimate. So now, let me go sort of in closing before we have some time for questions to 2 things. One is part of the speech and then my personal appeal to you. It seems to me that the best, and I usually say this in court at the end of my testimony, the best way to understand most of the guys I interviewed who are on death row is they're untreated, traumatized little boys who inhabit the bodies of scary men. And what makes them so scary is at least twofold. One is the incredible violence they're capable of committing. The other thing that's scary about them is usually how completely unconscious their motivations are. That, for example, the guy I was telling you about, his mother left with the brother and the drugs. In first grade, in kindergarten, he was thrown out of kindergarten for assaulting a female teacher. In first grade, he was thrown out for assaulting a female teacher. In second grade, thrown to school for assaulting a female teacher. In third grade, he assaulted a female bus driver. I said to him at one point, we've been talking for about an hour and a half, I said, boy, it sounds like you have trouble with women in authority. He said, yeah. I said, as gently as I could, do you think it has anything to do with your mother abandoning you in 2.5? And I swear to God, I said, man, I never thought of that. And he probably hadn't. In part because to get your head around the idea that your mother abandons you, who the hell's going to want to go there? That is so big. So the degree to which they are being controlled by unconscious forces related to their untreated trauma is often startling. To an outsider, sometimes it seems transparent, but for them often it's the last thing they would think of, or could think of, would want to think of, could dare to think of, could tolerate thinking of. Otherwise, they would fall apart. And, there are cultural messages that interact with that. Boys are told it is better to be mad than to be sad. And boy, do a lot of people pay price for that, particularly women in the world. Tremendously. Women particularly pay the price for that. So they're completely dissociated, fearful. And they're scary as a result. Let me just end this part with a few examples. I interviewed a guy this summer in South Carolina and testified in this trial. The guy was so dangerous that in the courtroom, They had 70 prison guards in the courtroom because they were so afraid he was just going to blow. After 2.5 hours of being with this guy, it became almost transparent what had happened. He was a skinny little kid who had a range of traumatic experiences that was just awful. And it was so clear that when he went to juvie, when he went to juvenile, he weighed 142 pounds. He was only 5'8". 5 years later, he weighs 210 pounds and is this muscly, scary guy. He pretty clearly was not going to take it anymore. When I often ask these guys at the end of the interview, what is the most surprising thing? This guy was actually now in his 30s, and these peels and things and often last years. What is the most surprising thing about you that you could tell me that people would never think of? He said, that I cry myself to sleep every night. This guy, they had 7 guards in the prison, the courtroom to protect everybody from. And in that particular, the reason I mentioned that example is, I was looking at depositions taken by kids who were in juvie with him when he was 15, because there was a federal lawsuit about conditions in juvenile detention in South Carolina. And there is one of the depositions, a kid who knew him then, saying, yeah, one of the things about Khalil was he cried himself to sleep every night. So this wasn't something he was dreaming up for me, this was already in the record. Charles, who had 20 traumatic experiences, any one of which I'm sure that any of our kids would have been in therapy the next day, including witnessing when he was 8 years old, a girl he knew be raped and sodomized and killed in a field in his neighborhood. That one experience would have sent our kids, they would have been in therapy for a year. Not 1 minute of therapeutic response. In the context of the family, where there's no psychological availability, processing, and all the rest of it. 20 experiences like that by the time he was 16. Then there's the guy Roger Dale, one of my favorite death row inmates. I interviewed him about 8 years ago for his case, and there was something sweet about him that I couldn't quite pinpoint. All this kind of stuff, internal abandonment, institutionalization, witness murders when he was a kid, all this stuff. It happened that he was still on death row in the same prison in South Carolina that the other guy was in. So I realized I could see him again, so we reunited after 8 years. And he said, now he's in his 50 now. Body covered with prison tattoos. You've seen prison tattoos. There tends to be some mixture of scary with crosses and knives and blood and gang stuff. But because he had a shunt for his liver troubles, he opened up his shirt to show me the shunt. In the midst of all his tattoos, he has in the center of his chest tattooed the Pink Panther. It is stuffed animal from childhood. The last guy I want to talk about is a bridge to my appeal to. Arturo Carido grew up in El Salvador, in the worst of the political violence there. His mother left him, El Salvador, to go to Los Angeles to make money. His father was incarcerated for murdering somebody. He was put in the care of his grandparents at a time when there were death squads roaming through the village, and the soldiers would come, and people would be beheaded and their heads stuck on pikes in the village, and bodies, and it culminated by the time they would huddle in their house at night when we were shooting, and he'd cry. And he was a very frightened little boy of marginal intellectual competence, shall we say. It culminated when he was now 15. A death squad came through town and shot his grandfather in the face and killed him. Then his mother came and took him and brought him to Los Angeles for a better life, where of course he was drawn into the Salvadoran gangs in Los Angeles, which are rampant. And this is a life that's basically forfeit. He's committed, 6, 8 murders. The testimony I was doing for 2 he committed in Virginia. Really grisly, nasty murders. He's a little slight little guy, He's a little pathetic little guy who was so clearly in this context of abandonment and trauma and unresolved trauma and more trauma, just basically says, you know, I'm sick and tired of being scared of it. Other people are being scared, not me. And his life, you know, he's already on death row in California. Virginia's trying him with the death penalty because they don't trust the Whigs in California to kill him. They want, we're tough in Virginia, we'll kill him. And, but on your seat's a little handout about this. Try to listen to me and not read it right now from the handout. That's the danger of having it out there. So I started working on this case in May, and just feeling, you know, the weight of the wastage of his life. And as it turned out, I was going to El Salvador with a group of students from my university and take kids on trips, and social justice and spirituality trips. And so I go off to El Salvador thinking about this guy, you know, and there's a lot of terrible stuff to see in El Salvador even today. But towards the end of the trip, we visit a little school. It's a nursery school and kindergarten, actually through grade 6, in this town of Zaite, which is, if you think you know poverty, most of the poverty you probably know is like the Hilton compared to what this is like. This is utter destitution. They don't even have running water. Gangs control everything. In fact, the minibus that took our students to visit this school, the driver said, I can't stay here while you're in the program because if I stay here, the gangs are coming and demand extortion money from me. It's called La Renta. And it's all over El Salvador. So he had to leave us there and come back. But this amazing guy named Carlos Diaz has gotten permission to have this school there. Doesn't even pay renta. And so we go to the school, you know, I brought my hand puppets, which I always do, and doing stuff with the kids, and, you know, and our students are interacting with them and doing craft projects. So at one point, I was sitting by myself against this low cinder block wall in this school. And this photo, which, if you can put the photo up now, you're telling me. I'm so technologically primitive here. My modern assistant is going to. So this happened. What you see in this photo is what happened. I hope you can see. In the old days, I would hold up a photo. Now it's digital. I hope you can see this. This happened. Can you turn down the lights just for a minute? Well, can you see it reasonably well? This little girl, this 5-year-old girl, comes and sits in my lap and snuggles in with me, and I sing her a lullaby. Now, you know, emotionally, this was just a wonderful thing. You know, a child comes and sits with you. But of course, you know, intellectually, I'm thinking, why does a 5-year-old girl come and sit in the lap of a strange man? And indeed, as you might suspect, there are issues of abuse in her house. But with her sitting in my lap, it sort of occurred to me a parable, a story that you often hear in the prevention field. It's called the parable of the starfish. Some of you may have done this. The parable of the starfish is somebody is walking down a beach. We used to say a guy, but now it could be a woman. It's probably more likely a woman, actually. If you saw today's USA Today, you see women contribute to charities more than men, so probably a woman. So she's walking down the beach. And she sees somebody up ahead picking things up on the beach and throwing it in the ocean. And she gets up to this guy, she realizes he's picking up starfish and throwing them in the water. And now it becomes more likely it's he. He says, what are you doing? And the woman says, well, I'm saving starfish, you know, because if you leave them on the beach, they dry up and they die. If you throw them back in the ocean, they live. And the guy says, are you crazy? Look, the beach is covered with starfish. What does it matter? And she picks one up and she says, it matters to this one. So this is my starfish. So what came to me was there was nothing I could do about this guy, Alfredo Carido. His life was forfeit. But here's another generation of Salvadoran children. And in this school, they're taking care of these kids as best they can. There used to be a full-day program with a lunch, and because donations from the U.S. have fallen off because of our economy, they're back to half-day. They feed them breakfast. And it hit me that I could do something for this school. The first thing I did was the fee that I was getting as an expert witness in the death penalty case, I donated to the school to create a library, donate books, because they didn't have either. But then it's really taken hold of me here. So I've already personally, going to pay for this girl's education. We're buying her a bed for this little shack she lives in, so she doesn't have to sleep in the same bed with her father and mother. I was just there last weekend. I did a workshop on trauma and child development. I got puppets, hand puppets. We donated, our students donated. I have pictures of the kids with the puppets, doing drama with the kids and puppets and all this sort of stuff. So now what I'm committed to is restoring the other half day of their program. So they can feed them lunch and have them there for the second half of the day. So this has become a consuming passion. Those who didn't know last night, I inflicted this on them. This is my starfish right now. And if you have any way to help, you have a sheet that gives your place to. If I can get 1,000 students to donate $20 each, skip one Saturday night at Pizza Hut. I can feed these kids, I can teach these kids, I can reach these kids. So, understanding without action is irresponsible. So before I start weeping completely, let's take questions. Preguntas. Yes. There's a mic. They want you to come so they can record your question.
You mentioned that for the girls who were rescued in Thailand, that they were using trauma-focused CBT, among other things.
Yeah.
And you said their original cognition was, I'm worthless, nobody likes me. In combination with all the ceremony and the holding that must have been going on, was the CBT effective in also changing that cognition?
Yes, it was. There's a guy there doing this, an Australian guy doing his dissertation on the program, whose name I even have here somewhere. And it was in conjunction with Johns Hopkins University, I believe. And they were finding that they were shifting their cognitions as well as shifting their behavior when they go back. But it was the whole package. And you can see with the girls temperamental variations. There are some who are, if you work at all with sexually abused girls, there's some girls who are sort of over-sexualized and their interactive style is sexualized and dealing with that. And there are girls who are very, very withdrawn as well. But by the end of this 18 months that they're there, they're having very successful of getting them reintegrated in the villages, or if even if that's impossible, they'll get them reintegrated in another life. It was very, very impressive. And so having been in Cambodia 25 years ago when the place was a wreck, now it's not a wreck in some sense, but thousands and thousands of sexually trafficked girls, many of them from Vietnam. There's a movie called Holly. Anybody ever seen Holly? It's a dramatic attempt to dramatize this. It's set in Cambodia, and it's a young American guy trying to rescue one Vietnamese girl. Don't see the movie if you have sharp objects in your house, or guns, or medicines, or ropes that you can hang yourself with, because it's a very, very depressing movie, and it does not have a happy ending. I'm going to warn you of that. So make sure you're not in a low point when you see this movie. It'd be very dangerous. But yes, so they are doing outcome research, and this guy's dissertation is on that, and they're changing their social identity as well as their self-concept. And this beautiful idea of giving them a sewing machine after they told them to sew, so they could go back to the village and people say, hey, pretty valuable. This little girl in the picture, I went to her house, and it's not even a house, Monday. It's a dirt floor, it's corrugated, it's a piece of canvas, it's on the side of the hill. When it rains, the rain runs through the house, and there's a little trench they run it off with. It's just, I've been a lot of places, but this was really destitution. And part of the reason for the visit was to send a message to the father particularly that somebody from the outside valued this child and was watching. And so the message was sort of multiple. It was very respectful and delivered, I thought, because I went with the director of the school and a person who works for this agency. But it was also very clear, that we're going to buy her a separate bed so she doesn't have to sleep with you, and I'm going to pay for her schooling. And I brought her, a stuffed animal, and care about this child. And so they do this with these girls amazingly well. Heartbreaking, but amazingly well. One of the most, I saw this youth empowerment program. It was really terrific. One of the things we had to drive 2 hours on a paved road, an hour on a dirt road, 20 minutes on a dirt trail, get in a boat, and go upriver 25 minutes to this little village. And it was this amazing youth empowerment thing. In an Asian culture with a lot of deference for adults, they had the kids were talking on equal level with the village elders and the police, and they do these little plays about trafficking, about, aimed at parents and kids. Don't get sucked into thinking you can send your daughters to the city and then become maids because it's not where you're going. Just remarkable, and it's totally primitive, technologically primitive thing. So very encouraging in a way. But the only way you can psychically survive this is if you think about the starfish thing. If you say, I can't save all the starfish, therefore I won't save any, you'll never save the starfish, and you'll drive yourself crazy. So this for me is sort of the alternative to the insane asylum. There's another girl there too, who, I'll tell you her story too, but we stayed overnight with families in this town. So there's this girl, she's having her 15th birthday, which if you know Hispanic culture in Kingsbury is a big deal. Her mother abandoned her when she was 2, so she spent her whole life with her father. It was very sweet, but not very effectual. Her grandmother, her great-grandfather, her aunt, who's been like her second mother. Now she's finishing with public school such as it is, and the high school is even worse. And her mother now comes back into her life and says, she's now married another man in the capital city. She has enough money to pay for her to go to high school. If turn her back on the family's raised her. She'll turn her back on the family's raised her, and the mother will pay for the school. So the girl chooses to stay with her family, although she really and desperately wants to go to good high school. So I'm paying for high school. We just visited the school on Tuesday. She got the highest scores on the entrance exams. She doesn't have to choose between her family and her now recently death mother. But she's all, the other thing was, it's so easy if you don't have direct experience to think that there are not psychologically sophisticated issues among very poor, traumatized, depressed people. But they have inner life too, They deal with mother issues the way some of you probably do. But in some different context. So anyway, so now I just saw her, she's like my goddaughter now, and I got this goddaughter and that goddaughter, and filling up with starfish here. So we got her going to high school, which will be terrific, and now she's got intestinal parasites, so we're going to try to get the parasites out. But she is just a beacon of light, and she wants to become a doctor or something, come back and serve the community. So it's a great deal. I'm sorry, it was a long answer to one question. Another question before I bludgeon you into silence here. Yes. We'll go to the side of those two. Take you first. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm just wondering if you can comment a little on the role of poverty in all this. I read your American Psychologist article on social toxicity of poverty for kids, and just in some of your stories, thinking about, if kids who are traumatized get adequate support and treatment, they can do quite well and thrive. And so I'm just thinking about the implications of probably the kids who don't have access are the ones struggling and living in poverty. And so kind of getting back to the starfish, what can we do with this?
Well, poverty, you've read an article that I haven't read in a while, so hopefully I'm faithful to them. I just write them, I don't read them, In graduate school, I had to decide you either read or write. But anyway, that's not entirely true. The two things about poverty are, one, if you look at these risk accumulation models, poverty shows up as a big risk. But if it's the only risk factor, by and large, kids will be resilient to deal with it. When it's coupled with parental absence and substance abuse and this overwhelming amount to carry. That's one part of it. But there is a sort of policy issue that you point out, that if the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which is, most of you in the US is not ratified, unlike every other country in the world except for Somalia, they don't have a government. Anyway. One of the ways of reading that is that there should not be a correlation between the parent's income and child's access to basic rights of service. And to the degree that we allow that correlation to exist, it's a sort of public policy failure. Years ago, we did a study that looked at the correlation between neighborhoods of poverty and child abuse rates. And it's a pretty substantial relation. When the study was replicated in Canada, they found a much smaller correlation. Because in Canada, the connection between your parents being poor and you having access to good services is much weaker. They really try to make it zero. So that it's not something you're supposed to worry about. And of course, here, you do. So there's that part of it. It's a very clear policy issue about the degree to which we allow children to be denied because their parents can't generate enough money. The other part of it, though, is the role of economic inequality, which is a different issue, although it has some of the same roots. For me, it was captured sort of anecdotally by a kid who once said to me after an interview, he said, Dr. G, when you were coming up, did you come up poor or regular? And that really is what the research in this is about. That if the choice of being poor and regular, then to be poor means you're irregular. And all the shame and rage that implies. One of the worst things I ever heard in Chicago, and you can hear a lot of bad things, was in this school that served the highest risk neighborhood in the whole city, this teacher had started the Honor Society. Now imagine, these are the kids who against all the odds are sticking with school and doing well in school. And she wanted to celebrate their success at the end of the year by having a pizza party for them. And they could not get a pizza delivery company to come to their school. Imagine the shame and the rage that you feel. I'm not even good. Screw it. Why try so hard when you can't even get a pizza at your school? So, there is this body of research on inequality as opposed to, average income and so on. And it is a toxic influence. And again, when we were in El Salvador with the students, we went to a talk at the university, the University of Central America, and the sociologist was saying, yes, we have a big problem with economic inequality here in El Salvador. There's a measure, something called the Gini index, G-I-N-I. It's a measure that goes from 0 to 100. 100 means complete economic inequality, where 1% of the population has 100% of the income. 0 means complete economic equality, where every 1% has 1% of the income. So nobody is at either extreme. So the range is from about 20, Denmark, to about 80. 1 year was Namibia in Africa had the worst one, 20 to 80. So this guy says, we got a big problem here in El Salvador with economic inequality. Our Gini score is 46. Oh, that's good. So later when I was meeting with the students, I said, do you know what the United States Gini index is? 41. So there's a big issue here. And it obviously related to poverty, but it's also an independent issue as well. And probably has more psychological impact than poverty. Because poverty is, in terms of resources, in India they define poverty as having less than 2,000 calories per day in your diet. And using that measure, 20% of poor. Here we use, what is it for a family of 4 now? 20,000, 16,000, and about 20%. We could solve poverty today in the U.S. by using the Indian standard. Almost everybody got 2,000 calories. Or we could make India feel really crappy and make them use the American standard. But that's not the point. The point is, like when I visited, 40 years ago, I visited in China before Americans typically went there. I met this old man in the village. I said, tell me about how things are better now than before, in the 1930s. He said, oh, well, now many people are rich. Then very few people are rich. I said, how about you? He said, yes, I'm rich. I said, how do you know? He said, well, I have a wristwatch and a radio and a bicycle. And he was rich. Now, that was 40 years ago. Today, he wouldn't feel rich. Because today you need a car, a cell phone, and a DVD player. So that, to me, is almost more intractable than poverty. Because you can't solve it just by raising the average level, because there's always a sense of why don't I have what regular people have. So there is, for example, there's something called the Luxembourg income study, which asks how many times higher is the income of the top 10% than the bottom 10%. And they studied 18 countries, European countries, Japan, US, Canada. Sweden was in there about 2.2. This is, oh, by the way, this is after taxes and benefit programs. Because the society may say our economy generates this gap, but because we value equality, we use tax policy and benefits to narrow it. For Sweden was about 2. Canada was about 4. Only one of the 18 countries was bigger than 4, and that was the United States, where it was 6. You probably have seen these things that, the gap between CEO salaries and workers in companies, which used to be, was, big, but CEO is a successful person who's made their way to the world. It used to be like 50 to 1, now it's 400 to 1. And so, there are indicators that this inequality is growing. And even if people say, well, it's raising all the ships, which it isn't. Even if it were raising all the ships, still it leaves people at the bottom feeling less valuable. But to double that, the double whammy of saying, in addition to that, we've also got declining, actual physical decline in standard of living at the bottom. At a time, I'm not going to hold economics section, at a time when the shift of human activities from what is called the non-monetarized economy, which is where goods and services change hands without money, into the monetarized economy, that has happened dramatically. I'll give you just one example. 50 years ago, childcare was an $11 million a year industry. Now it's what, $4 billion a year industry. So the GNP shows $4 billion of economic activity in childcare. I don't know if that's the right number. Then it was a paltry 11 million. Is there really 400 times more childcare today than there was then? No, what happened was that childcare has been moved from the non-monetarized economy, mostly women did it, into the monetarized economy, where women get paid for doing it at low salaries. So it's not growth, it's a transferring of activities into the other. And in fact, this can often be a negative thing. If you used to be able to swim in the river in your town for free, and now it gets so polluted you have to build a swimming pool, now that shows up as growth in the economic system. But in fact, it's, if anything, a net loss in quality of life. But it also means that to participate in life, you need more income. Some of you who are young may not really get this, but certainly if you're my age, the cost of being a normal teenager today involves a cell phone, a computer. You could be a normal teenager for a lot less money when I was a teenager. And so your parents' lack of economic success was not in your face in the same way. It really was, in a sense, a kind of gentle time. And so, we can go on for hours about this book. So, yes, that's the answer. Other questions? Anybody else? We've got about 5 more minutes before we open to pumpkins. Yes. Yes, is that a question? Yes.
Yeah.
John, please. You purposefully strives to the microphone. Yes, sir.
So my question is kind of personal. I have a niece and nephew who have had some very traumatizing events just recently in their life. They lost their mother. And what I want to know is, how do you convince them to get into counseling? They're very resistant to it. So I believe there's benefit, but they just don't want to do it at all, and they're just very, very resistant. So,
okay. Not uncommon, I think. Certainly not uncommon. So the good news is, most of these things that Bruce Perry was talking about are not therapy with a capital T. So maybe in addition to all the sort of implicit therapy of reassurance, life will go on, the people will still care for you, we will honor the memory of your mother, but also, how about a dance group, how about a choir, is there a spiritual life that they're part of that they can participate in, all the things that Bruce talked about. And then finally, most people, how old are the children?
14 and 9.
Okay. There's still 9-year-old particularly, but the 14-year-old to some degree. I would say in general, the worst way to talk with children is to sit down and talk with children. That better you do the dishes together, you do some cooperative activity, you build something, you clean something, you do something, and allow conversation to burble up from there on the child's timetable and from the child's perspective. With younger children, it's particularly important that adults don't impose what they think the issues are. The older they get, the less of that there's an issue. But it's very hard for us to really know what their issues are. And it's also, we have to be very careful that we don't, particularly if they've formed an explanation that is sustained to them, that we not dismiss it. I'll give you an example. Years ago, I was flying on an airplane. Next to me was this little 6-year-old girl. And obviously she had missed stranger danger that day because she was willing to talk with me. We had this long conversation about how, she told me the whole story of her life, her long life at 6, about how she used to live with her mother and her father, and then her mother got sick, and so she lived with her father, and then her mother got better. Now her father was buying a new house in Florida that wouldn't have enough rooms. We were flying from Florida to New York. There weren't enough rooms in the house in Florida for her to have her own bedroom, so she was going to New York to live with her mother because she had enough room in her house. It was a totally preposterous story. With his divorce, custody disputes, residential treatment for substance abuse, mental illness, all this stuff. But this little girl has this perfectly positive story about it. Now, at one level you say, well, we've got to disabuse her of that fantasy story. But the point is, until we have something better to replace it with, and we have to be very careful about that. So one of the questions would be, do they have they made sense of this in some way before we translate? The conclusion of the story is when we got to New York, the flight attendant says to the little girl, you have to wait on the plane till I can take you off. So the little girl to me says, will you tell my mother I'm here? So I naively said, well, how will I know who's your mother? And she very indignantly said, well, she'll be the happiest person in the airport. So I got off the plane, and there was the happiest person in the airport who actually looked a lot like her. And I said, you waiting for your daughter? She said, yeah, well, she's on the plane, and she's being. But the point was, that particularly with younger children, before we try to deal with their story of it, we better make sure we understand the story and have something better. And 9 and 14, they're still, I think we need to be available but not pushy about it in a way, particularly if there are other indicators of them, if they're not in trouble at school, if they're not in trouble in the neighborhood. Are they staying with their father? Is that who they're with now? Or somebody else? Grandma. So, knowing if the grandmother feels like, they're eating their breakfast, they're getting up. Because one of the ways of the sort of psychological first aid is reestablishing regular routines. And if they're able to participate in that, that's sort of like a holding action. And then eventually, opportunities will arise to deal with some of these. But it may take a while before it's really the time, because it's a bit like, if you remember your algebra. Remember algebra? Remember, you could solve an equation that had x plus 5 equals y. You can solve that equation, but you can't solve x plus y plus z equals 6. And to start having the child deal with all the aspects of the change coming from death of the mother is like asking them to solve an equation with too many variables in it. So you got to control the number of variables, so then eventually, all right, now they got the routines back, so now we have a numerical value for z, now we can solve for y. And children are going to differ temperamentally in how and when they need to approach that. There's this guy at Columbia, Bonanno, who does research on what's called hardiness. That some people have a more hardy approach to traumatic events, so there may be differences both developmentally and temperamentally between the 9 and the 14-year-old. So I'm sure there are people in this room who probably have experience with this. Anybody deal with child grief in response to paternal death? Let's see people nodding. Here's somebody. So, probably people really know something about this. I'm just shooting my mouth. All right, we're at 12:30, and I want to thank you so much for being here. It's been such a delight.
So, Dr. G, so thank you very much for coming. And just to let you know that he's been kind enough to say that if you have books, he will actually autograph your books. So we have a table out there, and if you have other sort of questions, that we will chat with you briefly. So we're really pleased that you came all the way from El Salvador and back to
We're actually here.
And I can guarantee you that a lot of good messages. Thank you very much.